Press play to enjoy this video. Press pause to think about your schedule. Press close to do something more useful with your time.
You can do anything.
Call of Duty presumes a lot about the significance behind a button press. When it asks you to press E to pay respects, it assumes a lot about what that bare minimum of interaction is supposed to represent. You're supposed to be expressing loss over a fallen comrade whose horrifying sacrifice you witnessed during the futuristic Second Korean War, where everyone wears robotic exoskeletons and Metal Gears trample around past low-flying drones that all swarm up together to make themselves easy targets for some reason. That button prompt doesn't work because the lead up to it tries too hard to take itself seriously. Its execution borderlines on self-parody, and maybe the game would have been funnier if it didn't have it. That button prompt is just one of the many reasons why the campaign in this Call of Duty is probably my least favorite one out of the whole franchise. The gimmick here is your soldier's Exo-suit, which is a lofty little device that lets the game designers copy in a whole bunch of features you've seen in other games. You have a double jump, a boost dodge, a boost slide, and some supplementary gadgets like a portable riot shield or a bullet time button, but none of those change the fragility of your character, or the laser-perfect accuracy of your first shot, or the single hit that it takes to stagger an enemy down. A Call of Duty campaign with a double jump is still a Call of Duty campaign, and the reason why I didn't like this one so much is because it has a whole lot of those familiar moments where you're stuck in an open field with little cover, endlessly spawning bad guys, and vague, unclear scripted events needed for progression that can be easily missed. A lot of the levels in this campaign remind me of that first Vietnam level in Black Ops 1. The idea, though, is that you can use those exosuit abilities to gain advantages of momentum and versatility over enemies, and maybe mitigate the difficulty of those harder choke points. But your playstyle is really going to depend on how dense the level is with both bullets and cover, because your dominant strategy is still going to be just to stand in one spot and point and click on bad guys until they're thinned out enough to move forward. For some reason, they don't fight back when you do this, they just run into your line of fire, and it just saves you time and trouble to play the game the most boring way you can play it. The AI seems to switch between being either completely unaware of your presence or being magnetically attracted to your presence. That's why this new focus on mobility doesn't exactly mesh with the traditional fragility of your usual Call of Duty heroes. Your new options for flanking and ambushing enemies really translate into new options for getting hit from different angles. Occasionally you can pull off neat tricks like shielding yourself into gunfire to melee bad guys up close or boosting over cover to peek at their positions, but it all depends on inconsistent level design and enemy placement that doesn't always give you the verticality, the cover, and the limited enemy firing angles that you need to pull those moves off. Instead, most of your basic running and gunning time will be spent pointing and clicking on bad guys from far away, or just inching forward while pecking at their shins from whatever tiny slots of visibility you can make do with. It's just too easy to get stuck at moments that kill the pacing of what the game's trying to portray. Like some of these QTEs, I got stuck at them for the dumbest reasons. Look at this. Your guy walks into the back of a truck. There's a silhouette of a bad guy in the back of the truck. The focal point of this shot is the back of the truck, but your button prompt is actually all the way over there. Look at this E. You've got bright yellow text on a bright brown background. Great choices, guys. The camera shaking and blurring it all over the place doesn't help it either. Those moments represent some of the worst elements of 11 years of Call of Duty's level design, and that's why, despite this year's version trying to amp up the creativity, I still feel like it falls flat. I'm a fan of the fast-paced, tightly scripted Infinity Ward campaigns, but the one in Advanced Warfare seems to have a pacing problem that you see more often in the Treyarch games. Instead of zigzagging back and forth from heavily scripted quiet time to super quick 10-second gunfights and back, gunfights here last for minutes at a time, often without music, without competent AI helping you, and with frequent sound clips of them barking the same orders over and over again faster than you can clear out the enemies to complete them. Those are old problems, and that surprises me because it's obvious that Activision is trying to get creative with Call of Duty, now that sales are down and that familiar settings have run dry. Believe it or not, the weirdest reason why I think I liked the campaign in Ghost better is because it was a lot easier to make fun of. It was a bit closer to the bottom of the barrel. I never felt like I was expected to take it seriously when the major feature that year was a dog. And that's how I like Call of Duty games. They're thoughtless popcorn entertainment. If I can laugh at it, then good. But here I am, expected to press E to pay my respects in a setting that should be laughably cartoony, with sleek transitions and stylized future tech and Kevin Spacey almost green-screened into the cutscenes, but I can't laugh at it and enjoy myself because the fresh new style is just such a harsh contrast with the hyperlinear, hyper-scripted, passionless, playerless level design of this whole series. It has moments like this, where you might get excited thinking about how you can cruise a hoverbike around the rainy streets of a post-cyber-apocalypse Neo-Detroit, but then whatever NPC is your coach at the moment will say something like this.
Sync to me. Keep it on autopilot.
And it's not like the functionality isn't there. You actually can control the bike later on, but only during a loud, bombastic, heavily scripted escape scene that can't adapt to any bit of the player meddling into its sacred, precious script. Call of Duty with the double jump, with laser guns, with jetpacks and wall hack grenades and homing grenades and Kevin Spacey and hoverbikes and robots is just Call of Duty with the double jump. You press a button to pay respects, to turn on a pre-scripted cutscene, in the same way you press a button to activate mag gloves and climb up a building in a pre-scripted cutscene. It is boring to play. When you are actually fully in control of it, your hands look like this. On the other hand, when you load up the multiplayer, suddenly your hands look like this. It's a big difference, actually. In no other installment is it more apparent that a Call of Duty with the bad campaign is not a bad Call of Duty. This is the half of the game where those new mobility options actually do end up helping it out a lot. Call of Duty with the double jump is actually a much more interesting multiplayer game than regular old Call of Duty, and your boost dodging and air dashes end up adding a whole lot of finesse not just to your movements, but also to the minimum amount of precision needed to aim at other players. The skill ceiling here is a lot higher. There's a lot of interesting hidden tricks to it too that aren't readily obvious, like how combining the slide with the double jump makes you super jump, or how double tapping reload makes you super reload. It's a refreshing focus on speed and precision that reminds me a lot of the optimism I felt after playing Titanfall. You have to do a lot of that Unreal Tournament style aiming where you need to track tiny targets who are zigzagging through the air. Using cover and strategic loadout options still matter, but not nearly as much as just raw player skill does. You can actually run and gun in this one. There's a default loadout for it, and it's pretty darn fun. There are more loadout options than ever. There are randomizable, variable weapon loot drops that can be redeemed for EXP. There is a crazy amount of customization that lets you change everything from the crosshair in your scope to the really overpowering bonuses you can tack on to score streak rewards. And that's another kind of interesting concept. Score streak rewards. Kill streak rewards are replaced by score streak rewards here, and that score in question includes team assists and objective captures. That mixes up the old Call of Duty problem of empowering the already dominant players by instead empowering the most cooperative players. That's not necessarily a fundamental game-changing difference, but it does increase the player's strategic options while also raising the skill ceiling and addressing an old problem. Those double jumps and those boost dodges do help mitigate the incredibly quick time to kill in these games, even though it still has an incredibly quick time to kill. If you're not looking in the right place at the right time, you can't boost out of the way, and bam, that's all it takes. No time to react. Call of Duty with double jumps is a more interesting take on Call of Duty, but it is still Call of Duty. It's just ironic that the multiplayer game has much more interesting ideas for how to make fun gameplay than the single-player one, but it does strangely make that trade-off for the stability of the game engine. On PC, the single-player game looks and runs beautifully, but the multiplayer one performed much slower for me, and it seems to have an awfully conservative idea for what high texture resolution is supposed to look like. There are no dedicated servers. It's currently PvP lobby-based matchmaking only, and the netcode is about as bad as you'd expect that to be. Also, I got this error a lot. I don't know why. I've dropped out of match because of it, and on my way there I saw plenty of unpredictable lag spikes and sudden FPS drops. There's one map in particular that just kills my system, even though it looks much, much worse than other maps that can maintain a constant 90 frames per second on my system. In the meantime, though, it's hard to say that the fun I did have with that multiplayer was worth the hoops I had to jump through to get there, or the 7 or so hour campaign that was just bog standard. What redeeming qualities did that campaign have anyway? Kevin Spacey was a kind of interesting villain. It was pretty to look at and it ran good, but it otherwise made a grating and lethargic experience out of a plot far more simple than the elaborate, complicated, and bombastic stories its levels tried to tell. The multiplayer is the better half here, and that's essentially what makes this one of the better Call of Duty games, but you're probably not going to appreciate that unless you have a higher tolerance for the frequent, unstoppable deaths and the manic pace that these games have always had. It is, both for better and for worse, Call of Duty with the double jump.
We've taken the advantage.